G'day, welcome back to People Purpose Place for our regular Monday night slot at 6:30. We may or may not be running a few minutes behind schedule, but don't worry, your normal transmission will resume. Welcome, Darren.
Yes.
How are you feeling this week?
Yeah, good. I was just actually having a bit of a check-in internally just to see how I felt, and I'm a little bit tired, but I'm up for this conversation. So I know we've sort of chatted a bit in the day, and whatever plans we had planned, we threw completely out the window, which was normally how we roll. But that's sometimes good because it makes you be more present for what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, and this week our third amigo, Christine, is not quite at full rat power, so she's taking a week off, and just the two of us again, which was interesting to have a conversation with Christine earlier today about the intended topic for tonight, where we spoke about having a safe space to have these bigger conversations. So maybe as a way to check in, Darren, we could model that to start with, given everything else has changed. Given the last couple of weeks and some big conversations we've had, how are you feeling about the change happening in housing space? Do you feel like we're getting our teeth into it, we're getting a grip on it, or is it still as elusive as ever?
Good question. I think the wheels are slowly but surely turning, and the chimes are ringing in the background. So I sort of feel like we should go into some sort of chant. I feel like it's like it was almost some introduction to a meditation that was going on.
Oh, dearie me! So,
which wasn't what I was. I didn't have any more. I didn't have any enlightened term that was going to match up to the bells. But I think that we've talked about the building industry for I don't know how long, and probably in 35 years it probably hasn't moved very far.
Correct.
But I do get the feeling like it's not going to be everyone's conversation, and we're not going to move, the middle of the market. But I just get the feeling that we are reaching a point where there are going to be some early adopters look at, how we want to live and what a home looks like differently to what we are currently. And I think this will come, we'll segue eventually back to a short conversation about, safety before we move on to other things. But I think there's also that part of it, which is in today's world, there isn't a lot of places for us to feel safe. And we were actually talking about emotional safety, not physical safety. But I think they're both interlinked. So I've rambled on too far, but without summarising, I don't think the general situation is changing much, but I think the importance of the work we're doing only becomes more valuable by the day. What about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. To my mind, if we wanted to talk about building code and regulations and things of construction, we could fill up our days and broadcast into the ether and achieve nothing or very little, which I think is what's happened over the last 3 decades that I've been in the construction space talking about housing affordability. Not a cracker has actually changed in a tangible sense for the good. If anything, it's perhaps worse. But I am absolutely confident that some of the conversations, some of the ability of society to have more diverse thinking and a greater range of options up for consideration says that an alternative can absolutely get traction and be delivered. So exactly your point, it won't be mainstream and won't be for everyone. And the big four banks in the building industry as usual will still be the building industry as usual. But more and more people are looking to have a different view on product, a different view on big topics. Does Australia need to be a republic? Are the royal family still coherent, relevant? Genders, male, female roles, all of these, big, long-held, fixed belief systems are getting a variety of tweaks, modifications, which says to me we can have these bigger conversations.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So the intention originally was to talk about safety, which turned out to be unsafe and in the immediate time and place. But from your conversation earlier today and thinking in preparation for tonight, I think it's very relevant to call out you and I have a position of insider knowledge of the construction space, which gives us a unfair advantage in most conversations around housing. And that's not because we're particularly bright or well, I mean, you're a bit brighter than average, but I'm certainly not saying that I am. But by experience and just by being in it for so long and having seen the range of stuff we've seen, that is an advantage. So we probably need to fess up and put our hand up and say, look, we should have a conversation from where you are at, as in the audience, rather than where we're at, which is all this experience and advantage. Which is, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, and this is, I think, part of the conversation we had today, and it's an interesting topic. I mean, I really am looking forward to having the full conversation with Christine in this space, because we talked about this idea at the end of it about, what do people feel is a safe relationship and a safe conversation to have. And Christine's depth of safety is going to be different to your depth of safety and different to my depth of safety. And then also we talked about the idea that it's about the level of safety you need for what conversation you're having. So in the first conversation you have with a group of people, everyone's going to be feeling each other out a bit, and we can look at power differentiation, which is a little bit what you talked about there, about how can we normalize conversations to make sure that everyone's included, and those sorts of things. So we might find a way to make that conversation safe enough. We might look at how our language, and everyone gets stuck on this word politically correct, but maybe we can adjust our language to make sure that everyone's included and no one's not included in the conversation. Maybe we can have an acknowledgement that you talked about with this idea of, in society, not everyone's on the same, we understand that not everyone's on the same playing field, and that there should be an honest conversation around, privilege and where everyone sits in that, without bringing too many people down and pushing too many people up. But once we get past that, we're actually going to be talking, we could be talking and jumping in really quite deeply into deeper conversations, because if we're going to form a group in the fullness of time, we're going to have to deepen into that conversation. So we've sort of talked about this idea of the levels of how you go to form a household or a group. Might be, this introduction level, then it might be this membership level, then it might be this intimacy of a household level, and then we might get down into this really deep level, which is, what if I was living with these people long term, and we needed to form proper rules? Then the level of safety and trust you would have to have at that depth is probably going to be a hell of a lot deeper than what you'd have to do to build the initial safety net in first instance, which might be about normalizing normal conversation. So the reason that I want to come back to the safety conversation with Christine so much is that we need to declare you and I are middle-aged white guys. So, being frank and honest, us having a conversation about safety is really not a valid one, right? It's not a
Not our
balanced.
lived experience.
No, and it's also unauthentic because we don't have anyone else to balance that. We're not adjusting our safety level. You and I know each other. We have an extreme level of safety to the point where, because of our shared experience, but also our synergy, right? So this is not a conversation that we can have today, but we really desperately want to dive deeply into this one. And Christine, I was actually super impressed by Christine's ability to raise her reservations and concerns about entering the space of vulnerability to talk about safety, and have her own perspective, which meant, hey, between us three people, if we were having a conversation about safety, we can dive a lot deeper and we can start to talk about our shadows and our concerns and how my shadow might impact on the way I view things and the way I even view you. So I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into that with Christine. I'm hoping next week, because she's also been, probably without even knowing it, been a thematic teacher of mine to say, what is modeling a good use of power in a conversation? Because I can, I'm not a small person, so I can be, without even knowing it, I can probably be physically intimidating to people. And how do I measure that for the benefit of understanding that others' voices need to be heard? And then I've had those enlightened moments where I've gone, hey, it's the quiet person at the back of the room who's just left this unbelievable gem that probably hasn't had a chance to be heard. Maybe and some of that is due to not feeling safe to do so, and that I need to learn more on what I can do to bring that to conversation. Have you sort of felt similar things?
Yeah, absolutely. The input of the likes of Christine's, the mentors that we have around us who we look to for that guidance, it has to be, we can't surround ourselves with like-minded views espousing the same all the time, because we're just reflecting back what we already know and see and talk on a daily basis. So Christine's been invaluable for that world experience, even though she's a Yank. She really is an Australian. Doesn't like being displayed as an American.
And we've had some comments in the stream comments there as well, which we genuinely appreciate. And I desperately I do want to dive into this conversation. And we, something else that we discussed briefly was that we fully acknowledge also that no one is at the moment out there listening to us, right? There's probably a crowd of our friends and a few people who stumble across this by accident. But for us to improve in this space, we to some extent need to model it. And one of the only ways we can do that is actually by modeling it in this space where we do have. And, I've just got a text there come through from Christine. It says, I'm feeling more and more confident about publicly discussing that deep safety topic. And that's enormous. And I had to just stop there for a second, because I actually sort of had a wave of gratitude that she made that statement. And that's maybe more about her own ability to get to that place, because we know that if we were having that conversation about safety between the three of us, that could be a trust environment which would allow that to occur. But I honestly believe we need to get to that point when we get to this idea of, trying to come back on the topic a little bit here. If we get to the point of having collaborative households,
Yep.
I think we would all agree that we need to develop ourselves well enough that we can embrace other people with enough openness that we can aim to get to a safe place where we can be our authentic
that we'll
selves.
be human and frail, and we'll have better days and worse days. Some days I'll be a klutz, and that's okay. My intention is not to be, but some days I will definitely, use the wrong language, inappropriate, whatever. But I will own up to it. Accept when I've done stuff wrong, and hope for better days ahead, which is really all we can do.
Yeah,
very authentic place to be at that level of communication with people.
Yeah, 100%. So I'm
absolutely achievable.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the idea that that's not a destination, I don't think, is it? Like it's an evolving thing, which will be something that will have to be constantly worked on and evolved with. Because
my dad's reaching his 80th year this year.
Yeah.
And I've had better conversations with him this weekend than I've ever had, just because we've made the time and space and got to that level of conversation. Hopefully they're forever evolving.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm going away with my dad and parents. I for the first time, it reconciled with me, and then I think, I wonder what my kids think about. You do understand that they come from a different era, and they were exposed to very, very extremely different things than what we were exposed to.
Yep.
And just as we have formed in the way we have, they have also formed in the way they have, and maybe this, this mythical thing called wisdom, at some point collides, and you get a glimpse of that and go, I get it now. I see that reaction both in them and in me. The old apple doesn't fall far from the tree stuff. It wasn't a made up thing that doesn't ever work. There's always obviously some validity underneath that. So,
look, we've waxed lyrical.
So, yes.
And I think that's good to put it out there and invite some feedback back in. But we did also want to talk on a couple of references which have informed some of our recent thinking, so reading books and some of this topic. And of course, when someone's just read a book and it's fresh in their recall and mind, they're a genius. You can see it applied everywhere in your daily life.
Yeah, true.
All of our good habits drift, and we get into the 9 to 5 or the routine that we fall into, and sharing notes and sharing these experiences of what we've got out of a book, I find really helpful to compare notes and refresh our thinking. And I think we would all, Christine included, would invite people to read widely and start working on your own paradigms between your ears. How we view the world, how we view housing. So we have to ingest some more ideas and knowledge. Have you been reading something good recently, Darren, that you think is helpful in this space of finding and forming human agreements and safe spaces?
Yeah, it's funny how, when you have your time away from work, you probably should be reading something that's not necessarily aligned with everything you do every day. But I think we're a bit queer in the fact that, where there's a very politically incorrect word in today's world. We're still very passionate about understanding ourselves and understanding others. So hopefully we can develop a more balanced understanding of where we're going into, and then be able to maybe expound on that by using it back and passing it on. And I think the way you explained it too, I mean, I think we've talked about this a few times. I wonder whether groups that are formed, Ben Franklin used to have this idea of a junto, which was an area where, people could come together in a small group and discuss books as a way of expanding their own knowledge. And also the second part of that, I think, which you alluded to there, is potentially by sharing your experience, you're actually learning more about that book than you did the first time.
Of course.
Because the whole teaching is the best way to learn is a part of that as well. So so the two books that I've read recently, and one was very long, so I'd normally get 3 books faster than this, but The Master and His Emissary, which is Ian McGilgrave, who's a well-known psychiatrist and philosopher. And the other one, which I'm about 2/3 of the way through, these are audio books too, so we use the term read as a loose term these days, but close to reading. Compassionate Conversations by Diane Musso Hamilton, Gabrielle Miguel Wilson, and Kimberly Moser Lowe, which I've got all them wrong and I've massacred their names. Please apologise. So I apologise out front. And I've got after that queued up Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kinahan. But the first book is Ian McGilgrave's.
Ian McGilchrist, maybe.
McGilchrist, yeah, that sounds right. It generally discusses the impact of the left and right hemispheres of the brain, which I found quite interesting. And our normal understanding of we look to the right, we're using our left hand side of our brain, and we look up to the left and we're using the right hand side of our brain. And this general idea we all have of this idea with left-handers or right-handers that might access different parts of their brain. He has a very different perspective, which is that the left-hand side of the brain is very much about detail. It's very much about little bits. And the idea of the master and his emissary, in very badly explained terms, is that realistically the master should be our right-hand side of the brain, which is looking at big picture stories, those sorts of trying to understand full holistic understandings. Whereas the left-hand side of the brain is very much about micro details, and his concern for today's world is that we've become so left-hand brain hemisphere dominant that we're talking about the micro without ever taking in the big story. Now, I think we would all start to feel that has some resonance. This idea that we're speaking in, smaller and smaller sound bites, we're all captured by the next little bit of information.
Captured by the things. So particularly in the housing context, that I struggle to get beyond what colour roof, what sort of tapware, what particular things, when we need to address the big question of why housing. What are we trying to achieve at a big human level? The conversation often is dragged down to the micro bits. Do we hinge the doors on the left side or the right side? That's irrelevant until we work out why we're building this house. And if we're building this house with this financial construct as an investor to go into a speculative market to make all this money, that's a completely different purpose. If you're going to house people to bond together to form a tight-knit group and achieve their greatest purpose, then two vastly different outcomes. And we just not to have that high-level conversation.
That's a very good explanation, or a very good, localized example of seeing that roll out, which is we've become so fixated by this. And he's since, I don't know, in some of the Rebel Wisdom podcasts that he's been involved in, he's since almost come out with an alarmist response, which is if we don't move away from this position of being so left-hand brain focused, that the real impacts on society are enormous,
We'll
and
never see
that
a
is,
forest.
yeah, that's right. And we could become humans that are so stuck in our hamster wheels that we never stand to look back at it. And I think over the last year, I've definitely had some of those right brain thoughts. And when you sort of have a conversation with someone about, something maybe as simple as, we all thought it was a really good idea that both males and females could go out to work and we could both earn lots of money and have more stuff.
Yeah.
What if it turned out that all that happened was housing prices doubled or something in that time? So now we have to spend more time at work to afford a more expensive thing, and we're actually missing out on the important things in life, which is maybe spending time with our family or even spending time with our children while they're growing up. That's big thinking stuff that isn't, you can't just go, yeah, 6. So I got the answer. So a lot of people run away from that conversation. They're like, no, can I have another one where it just fits into the box and I can provide you a yes or no answer or whatever might be the case. So the book was very powerful. It's very long. He's incredibly detailed, and I'll probably need to go back to it again. But I think in a few of our chats, I've even dropped, little things that he said where I've gone, wow, that's an amazing perspective about something I thought I knew.
Yeah.
That I didn't know. And even, that idea, the two things that resonate or jump to mind is this idea where he said, the Latin word for focus is hearth. And that, I just found, wow, we're talking about this idea that people get mesmerized by fire and sitting around those things. And here it is again, hiding in plain sight from ancient language, which says, yeah, of course, that's the spot where you go to focus and you go to think about.
And the focus of telling stories, singing songs, passing down wisdom through generations.
Yes.
Which none of that is
the other one,
detail. It's the big picture.
No. And the other one, which, fitted with that perfectly with some of our conversations, is the word familiar, which, we sometimes hear and we just think it means your family. The real definition behind familiar is a household. And in, ancient times, that household was everyone in the household. That wasn't just the mum and dad and 2 kids. That was everyone from the person who might have emptied the poo cart, the poo cart, to, the people within your servant group.
Kitchen maids.
Yeah, they were all classed as you're all caring for each other. There was a certain amount of value for everyone, which wasn't discounted by their station in life. So that's certainly a book that's left a mark and will continue to leave a mark. Have you got something you're into at the moment?
I've actually read a couple over the years that have been perhaps a bit far easier to digest. And one that from a few years ago, Vision Lakini is a Malay gentleman.
Yes.
How to Code an Extraordinary Mind was a very well-renowned book of his, which talked about the implied. He made up a word which was BRULES, which is an abbreviation for bullshit rules, and society is full of these bullshit rules, like Hindus don't eat cow, and you must marry within your family's expectations, and you need to have, if you're this kind of heritage, you need to go and get a doctor's degree and follow this path, and they're all societal expectations, all bullshit rules. So he was quite easy to get into and just helped me broaden my thinking around what are the daily things that we pick up and do for a societal expectation. And then this one is a recent, Tom Ballard is a current Australian comedian. He might actually happen to be some sort of relation of mine as well, on my mother's side.
Yeah, right.
And he has done an enormous amount of work. I'm halfway through it. I only picked it up on the weekend. It's a very easy book to read, but he's got some incredible chutzpah behind it. So he's done the homework
And like the
on CIA attempts at change of regime, 76, successful change of regimes, 26. And you go, holy shit.
It's still 26.
That's right. It's an incredible success rate. And changing regimes are all these big picture things that have occurred as we've gone from one income in the 70s at 30% was enough for a mortgage to now two incomes at 50% is not enough for a mortgage. You go, that's that level of structural societal change. And, players like the CIA have definitely played their part from time to time.
And that's it's intriguing that a lot of the stuff, and even in that other book, it was talking about the fact that conspiracy theories, everyone's grabbing on to bits of sound bites of information, and then once you grab that sound bite, you can't let it go, and you build up a cognitive bias, and it goes around and around in circles. But now if we understand that information about the CIA have done this and done that, you can understand why it's easy to grab onto a bit of those sound bites and say, what else in my life am I, being controlled with? And did they do this and did they do that? Which can sometimes fracture people.
But none of those influences act in isolation. So they have to have 100% employment. You have to have rising wages and increasing standard of living to use the levers that the CIA used. So, those circumstances aren't in a vacuum. They aren't on their own. Was it good? Was it bad? Who's to say? And it's all done and dusted now. And those levers, obviously, are still at play today. And it may not be the CIA. It may be mobile phone usage. It may be an AI that's got a corruption in the software somewhere. It may be the Russians hacking, whatever. We won't know the outcome of these things until reviews are written, 50 years after the event. We'll be able to analyse and dissect it. But the point for me is that no market or system is pure, uncorrupted, in isolation. And all of our headlines and all of our conversation around interest rates do this, or bank applications do that, or house prices do this, is some sort of farcical, this equals that kind of answer. And none of it is, it has never been that case. And to think that the system is unbiased and uncorrupted and undiluted, and that's also not the case. Which again,
and I think that definitely. And I think the hard part is that, which is probably where my thought was before about maybe the possibility of change actually occurring, was because I think a lot of those things that society took for granted and said, this is what we've always had. You go and get a job, and then you go and buy a home, and then you have the security of buying a home. Those things are breaking down in front of us, right? So the vagaries of what you thought was your life are now eroding. So that means you have to start to question a lot of things. And actually, interestingly enough, going back to the Code of the Extraordinary Mind, which I read as well, I think you might have put me onto it. And might have done one or two of his courses or whatever. I do find interesting. Do you wonder whether books or any sort of learning, a little bit like, when you think about buying a red car, all you see is red cars when you drive around the streets, right? I always wanted red cars, and there you see it all the time. But I wonder whether the same with books, whether they resonate at a time and a place. And the reason I say that is I just saw some stuff which I think, there's a conversation going around with Jordan Peterson along the same lines as well. The guy who wrote the Code of the Extraordinary Mind has now had a little bit of audience capture. And I actually saw Vice try and infiltrate one of his weekends. And it was a high-powered, happy-clappy sort of thing, and everyone was, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and the world's going to change, and we're going to get what's ours, and all that sort of stuff. And he was very, when they actually got to interview him, he was very aloof, would be the word, in his responses, because you had this problem. You wrote this book, which is profound in its essence. Where do you go from that? And the answer is you run seminars and make a shitload of coin out of it, which is a natural function of life, right? Like we're in this
commercial world that we're in. Yep.
Correct.
Yep.
So he's gone and done that. Does it make him less right or more right or somewhere in between? Who knows? I don't know. I'm not in the loop to understand that, but it's interesting that he does seem to be captured by that, and that book resonated to me at that point in time, and now I still feel like I got benefit out of it, but I don't think I'd go back and reread that. But I do think something like The Mastery's Emissary, or what you're talking about there, at this point, I would go back and dive deeper into those conversations, because I still haven't got everything I need out of them.
I think some of the Wilbur Smith, not Wilbur Smith, Ken Wilber. Ken Wilber I'd go back to again, because he's a very deep, and his books tend to be quite heavy. And I'm absolutely convinced I would need to go back there. The Code of the Extraordinary Minds and that kind of book. It's perhaps the gateway to that level of thinking. And you put it down, and Vishen Lakhiani himself has probably been, as you say, captured by that mechanism. And maybe Jordan Peterson is some of the same sort of stuff that they now have to keep pitching to the audience that they've got, and would almost be seen as disloyal to migrate or change or evolve from that position.
Exactly.
Which is just, you've got to bring your whole audience with you, which is no small task.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard someone tried to trap Jordan in another conversation, which has never really worked. So I don't know why people do it, because they really end up looking like Muppets. But he sort of the person said, well, how much money do you earn if you're out here espousing to all of these things? And the numbers he talked about between his going on tour around the world endlessly, and his connection with he's now with Daily Wire, and what the YouTube contributions were. And I'd have to go back and check the exact numbers, but say he's making $400,000 or $500,000 a month between those mechanisms. Can you blame anyone for being stuck in the mud? Because ultimately you do that for 2 or 3 years.
Go out and do another book signing and another seminar and another lecture. You cannot, absolutely can't blame him for it.
No, and you can also understand that he's smart enough to know that everyone has their moment in the limelight. And that won't be forever. We've seen Ken Wilber go in notoriety from the front to the back and all in between, and I think he's still a valid person in this space to me, making integral conversations which seem to be as valid today as when he made them in the 70s. But again, it's easy for people to denigrate him and say blah blah blah, and he's an old man. Maybe he's going through a point where he goes, do I really need to be dealing with all of this silliness? But it is interesting that people still change in flavor. It's no different to Socrates' time. You be careful of what you say, because you can end up under the knife if you get this wrong. And it's just it's a virtual knife these days rather than a physical, maybe.
They're a bit more black and white about it back in the day.
Yeah, no, you're going to find it.
So there's, I think the premise is not that we have got the right books or these are the right books, but absolutely jump into the topic and grab something and give it a go. Because we would encourage you to expand your thinking and to do some long form thinking about the topic of housing. And if some of these books and these philosophers and powerful authors resonate and work for you, then that can't be a bad thing. If
No,
that doesn't
absolutely.
interest you and you just want the headlines and you just want to digest what the 6 o'clock news is telling us, then that's okay too.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, it is to
everybody.
be said. Yeah, I think it is to be said that if what we've learned is if you're not willing to do the work to dive deeper, that the reality of you forming a really strong, cohesive group is probably pretty limited. History has said a lot of stuff, and what it has said, unless you're willing to look at yourself, as well as work on what it means to be a successful group, it's not just going to happen by accident. And that any one of these books at its point in time might be helpful for adding a layer. And I'm just looking through. I mean, and this will be something we'll probably discuss in greater detail. But in Compassionate Conversations, the chapter headings are the original one is about conversations evolving. Yep. But then it says the second one is, what do we have in common?
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 3 is an exploration of our differences.
Yep.
The fourth one is intimacy and identity.
Yeah.
So who am I and where do I sit? The importance of true. So differentiating the difference between my truth, I, what we agree on, which is you, and the actual truth, which is it. I think that's really, really interesting. Having a clear intention. We talk about these things. We've said, oh yeah, we got this cause system thing, and what we do is we start off with an intent, and then we go, it's been a year since we've really done that. How we go back and revisit that. Hidden biases. Well, nothing there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. There's none of those. Actually, something that's quite intriguing is, and I have a crack at this next time. So I'm doing Sam Harris Waking Up, which is the meditation / practice / theory / thought provoking thing. And he has a meditation for a lot of different things. And I've just been following you'd stay fucking whatever it is, 30 something, and I'll listen to that one. But then I noticed he had this one about a walking meditation. So I thought, well, I've been doing a bit of walking because I can't go to the gym because my back's still got to be, sort of settled down a bit. So I go for a bit of a walk, and he makes this, and do it tomorrow when you're out there walking, if you get it to walk in a group of people. Yeah. He said, as you approach someone, be aware of what happens to their proximity to you. So as they get closer, what exactly happens to you when they're getting closer? So you've obviously got this, hey, someone's actually getting into my field, right?
Space,
Then you've also got the thing that I found really intriguing is you've got all of these things that just pop into your head, right? And he said, be aware your consciousness is the thing below, the true part below that level, right? So, and I was thinking, nah, what's he talking about? And then people come towards you and go, and in your brain, you go, you need to walk further. And you go, that's really bad. That's really, really bad. Yeah. And they would be having the same as you, like, crusty old bloke, what the hell are you doing? You need to stay off the beers before you start on that. But I just found it intriguing. We've got all of this stuff, this internal dialogue, which is, man, that dog, whatever, you go, where's all this shit come from? And it's all in there. And his point beyond that was that when you next take the step, try to step back from not applying and not even criticizing those things or whatever, but just acknowledging them as a thought and trying to work beyond your bias into something else. So that was very interesting. Strong emotions in conversation. We've seen that in the power of those. Mm-hmm. Clarifying power, which is what we started to talk about, and hopefully we can come back to with Christine as well.
Yeah.
Talking about social privilege, and
Yeah.
that's something I think you were alluding to at the start. There is, we come from a position. I mean, we were where we are now is just as much of a fluke as us being born somewhere else in the world and never being able to have a chance of an education or any
Yeah.
opportunity. It's just as we didn't pick this one, but there is a privilege that comes with it, right? Which we got to acknowledge.
We also can't get back. That is where
Correct.
we've landed. It's not out of my genius
Correct.
personally. It's just luck.
Definitely. And I think that's a really important distinction, that we need to find a way that you can have that conversation around privilege, but also whether with the fact that the people who've ended up there haven't done that because of their own, I decided to be born in this, socioeconomic position and go to this school. No, you didn't. That's just happened, right? Yeah. So I don't think people should be.
You wanted to be a prince for 70 years and then become the king. No.
Yeah.
You had no input to that.
No. So, but you can't then apply some level of extra scrutiny because they have that. I mean, 400,000 generations before that, you had a diamond that was created by slaves. Well, as long as he acknowledges that bias, he didn't actually, that's not something he can go and do much about right now. I mean, he can make actions that might make change and blah, blah, blah. But I think that's an important conversation. The conversation around being politically correct, I think, is an important thing to talk about because it's become so clouded in rhetoric. Growing through conflict, which we both definitely think is something that we need to talk about. Shadows in conversation, miraculously resilient, to atone and forgive, becoming wholehearted, freedom here and now, and in it together. So I think it's interesting that we've been developing a lot of this conversation. We've been having a lot of these roundabout discussions, but it seems like there is a group of authors who are having similar weaves to where we are and the place we are, different but the same, who are starting to have conversations which are somewhat aligned with what we think is the end goal, which is to help an individual be the best version of them, so maybe they can hopefully be involved in the best version of a group, which is the ultimate human, reason, which is to have.
And if we can make that tangible by delivering fantastic housing that enabled people to be the best version of themselves individually, then as a collective home unit, that would then radiate and network that in their immediate neighbourhood, community surrounds, instead of what I suspect we have, a large portion of our community, just an economic fear of loss of their current shelter, whether it be through their landlord or through the bank or these machinations of this finance system that's beyond all of our input. It's just what it is. I suspect there's more than 50% of our households across the country have a fear, an underlying fear of that. What will happen when my lease expires? What will happen when the interest rates go up? I'm going to go from 2% to 6%. What does that mean to my monthly mortgage payment? The number of people having that is huge. And if we can turn that the other way by enabling it, facilitating it with an intentional house, and house with intention to facilitate the best of us, then that would be some amazing work to do.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you also talked a fair bit then about the economics. That's before we get to the social, mental well-being component, which because obviously you can't even get to that point until you have some confidence that you're actually going to be able to financially be able to exist in that house. But above that layer is the thing, how many houses then above that are set up with the ability for then the occupants to have real good connectivity and work through issues and devolve
primary
real
driver
connection.
for every house built in Australia is an economic one. You know,
Yes.
can I make money out of this?
Correct. And as you said, I mean, I think those stats that you put up there almost reiterated those things. So
Yeah.
if, we were looking at houses that operate as effective homes, which
Yeah.
are about the household becoming enriched and connected, I think we'd be talking about low percents.
Yes. Very few that people, and maybe that's out of their forever home. So people talk about building their forever home.
Yep.
And that's a very small percentage of people who actually get to build what they perceive to be their dream thing. And often it's a collection of bits still. I'd like to have this bit and that bit and a sauna room and something else. But I'll wager London to a brick that there's very few of those structures delivered with the human prerogative, as the primary design.
Yeah.
Design
1,000% agree. Yeah, absolutely.
It's about time of me to go and of the week for me to go and step outside my comfort zone and do some more expanding on a dance floor.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing that for?
This is just the second week.
Yeah. But, what sort of dancing are you doing?
It's so far we've just looked at doing the cha-cha, which apparently you can teach any old dog. So so I'll be.
What about one with two left feet?
Well, still ordinary, but it's
awesome.
It's something that I've had a mental block all of my life about dancing and being seen dancing. So I don't actually care what I look like myself, but it's just someone seeing me doing it. So
and surprisingly enough, and just to finish on that note, is that other documentary I was talking about with there is actually a connection between learning dance and increased brain condition, because it's a learned thing that is actually quite challenging for the brain, but is something that we've had in our history forever. So have fun with that. Take some photos.
Sorry, someone's giving me the berries.
Giving you the roundup. Awesome.
So thank you for that. Good chat again, and books and topic I think is a warm up for Christine when she's feeling up to it next week.
Yep.
We do have some guests lined up, so we might have a guest next week or Christine. The topic of safety, safety in these conversations, I think is really key to get to.
Yes.
So that might be our priority for next week.
Yep.
And see how that all goes.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Thanks for your time, Darren. Appreciate these fat chats as always.
Absolutely. Great to catch up again, and we'll speak again soon.
Thanks, mate.
Thank
you, Colby. Sign us off, brother.